Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. And this is our monthly SDA Unlocked episode where we delve into the supply and demand data for specialist disability accommodation in different areas around Australia. This month, I am joined by Elizabeth, our consultant based in Melbourne, and we're talking about a couple of specific areas in Melbourne. We're going to be talking about Beveridge in North Melbourne, or more specifically the northeast SA4 part of Melbourne, as well as Weir Views in the Melbourne west part of Melbourne. The main reason we're going to be delving into these areas is because there has been a lot of development in these suburbs in the last year or two. There's a lot of construction going up there, and Elizabeth is going to really tell us really what's going on in those areas, especially in terms of future growth, future demand. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for having me on your show.
That's okay. We've been trying to get this. We've been trying to get this happening for quite a while because you're passionate about the Melbourne market and selling SDAs in Melbourne.
So Melbourne is, I think, one of the sexiest markets in Australia right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's unfair for me to say. So we sell SDA in Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, and in Melbourne. And I know Debbie does a lot up there in Southeast Queensland. So when I talk to clients about capitalisation, the market we concentrate on with that vernacular is always going to be Melbourne. And the reason that is because by 2041, the Melbourne population is going to increase by 26%. Now, when you look at that demand in a market, what creates capitalisation in a market or growth is putting that many people into one real estate market. What they're doing is they're going to drive up the prices of real estate. So there'll be continuing demand. Real estate will capitalise beautifully. The wonderful thing about Melbourne is that what Melbourne does as a city and as a state is it has incredible foresight into how to build micro-cities. And it's part of it was the Melbourne 2020 plan, and it's part of that Melbourne 2020 plan was really to create micro-cities that hadn't yet been discovered. And this is the wonderful thing. They have, from 2020, they planned where the growth was going to go. They planned the infrastructure, the roads, the hospitals, the schools. All of this was set down in the 2020 Melbourne plan, because they knew that this population was coming. When I drive into an area and I see a Coles or an Audi, I know that the population's coming because they've built those facilities for the population demand. And what grows real estate is an enormous population coming in and demanding to get into properties. So we've got that here in Melbourne, and that's at 26%. But different areas are going to grow at different rates. And this is what people need to understand. Everybody talks about the Australian property market, but it's actually not the Australian property market. It's micro markets around Australia that do very well because they've got the infrastructure, and they've got the job nodes, and they've got the hospitals, and they've got, connection to other major thoroughfares. So when we look at SDA and we have that dialogue with our clients, what we're looking at is, what do you want? Do you want yield now? If you take yield now, I can't give you great capitalisation. You're not going to ring me back in 20 years' time and say, Elizabeth, that property in Tasmania, that grew. Because Tasmania's population is only going to grow by 3%. Your price point into Tasmania is beautiful. It's really soft. It's like us putting an ATM machine in the middle of your lounge. However, it is not going to capitalise well. The market that's going to capitalise well is going to be Melbourne. And this is why. You've got that population change. Let's talk about these two areas, Weir's View, which is in Melton, and let's talk about Beveridge. Yep. So, Deb, Debbie, do you want to start with the data for Melbourne, for Weir Views?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so Weir Views is in the SA3 region of Melton Bacchus Marsh, along with other suburbs such as Hillside, Rockbank, Mount Cottle, Taylors Hill, Burnside, Caroline Springs and Strathtulla. Now, we have quite a large percentage that are currently on the NDIS. There's a population of 8,620 NDIS participants in that area. 6% of that would be about 517. Now, currently only 158 have SDA funding. So there's a huge growth there. We know that's going to happen or expect to happen. So demand 158. Supply, when we look at supply, we look at this in the number of places, i.e. the number of participant rooms in each dwelling. Total number of places currently in existence, 148. So 148 places for 158 participants, already an undersupply. But we know that with a potential 500 participants, there's a massive undersupply. And if we take that forward in the future, for example, doubling the NDIS population over the next 10 years, which is sort of where the NDIA have been going with their forward assumptions, could be 1,000 participants. Okay, looking on the other side of that is pipeline, and we are seeing a huge pipeline in this Melbourne West area. And this is probably what a lot of people are looking at when they are looking at the data. I'm seeing pipeline places 900 in 458 dwellings. So that looks like Melbourne West may well be planned out and already full and no more gaps there. So Elizabeth, let's talk about what else is going on in that Weir Views area to force a continuing ongoing demand in the future.
This is really exciting, right? We looked at Weir Views and that area, and this is what we know. So right now the population out there is about 209,000 people. That population by 2051 is going to be 416,000. So we've got a change of population between now and 2051 of 98%. Now, those people have to live somewhere. So imagine that there's this small containment of land that's getting that surplus has been eaten alive now. So land is selling really well in these areas because people are coming into these areas and they're buying in these areas. Well, by the time we get to 2051, that area, all of the land out there is going to be sold. There won't be anywhere for anyone to go. It'll be those that are buying in that area now that are going to be reselling into a market which is no longer 200,000, but by 2051, 460.
Well, it doubled. Mm-hmm.
It's just growth, isn't it? So we've been looking at particular land estates in Weir Views because what we know is there is a massive hospital. They've got these massive infrastructure projects that they're working on. So there's the Westgate Tunnel at $7 billion. I'll go back to the hospital later, but let's start with this stuff. We've got transportation infrastructure. So we've got the Westgate Tunnel at $7 billion. We've got the Westgate Interstate Freight Terminal at $2 billion. We've got the Western Highway upgrade of $1.4 billion. We've got $1 billion on the Palmers Road corridor. We've got $122 million for the Melton Highway. So what you're hearing is that there's going to be jobs. This is really key. People want to move into an area where they can work locally. So this is all about jobs. Then we've got infrastructure and resources and energy. We've got $1.9 billion being spent on that. We've got commercial developments. We've got the Melbourne Business Park at Hobson's Road at $2 billion. We've got the Cobblebank Logistics Estate. Now, logistics is just a big trucking infrastructure where people come in, they unload their freight, they go out. Now, this is the exciting bit. We talk about, like, when we're thinking about participant-centric model, what we want to do is we want to ascertain what's going to give that participant comfort. Like, where are their resources? Where are they going to live? What is their community going to look like? Now, this is the exciting bit. There is an approved construction to start in 2024, and it'll be completed by 2029, and that's $1 billion in the Melton Hospital. So they're talking about building a massive medical precinct. So when we're looking at positioning our investors down here in Melbourne, what we want to do is we want to concentrate on putting them into a land estate that is really close to this massive major medical precinct for a couple of reasons. We need then to have access to medical care. We need it to be a direct route. We have a land estate that we're looking at right now where it's actually 7 minutes away from this new medical precinct. But we also want to know that when our clients come through to transact out of that property after the 20-year program, that they can actually sell it into an area that has all of that comfort, all of that infrastructure. So that's why we're looking at this particular, Weir Views is really exciting for us. The other thing that we know that's going on in this particular area is we're a 3-minute drive to the Cobblebean train station. Now, here's the thing. When you're looking, even if this wasn't an SDA property that we were putting you into, if this was just an investment property and you came to me, this is where I'd put you, irrespective, because you've got medical precinct, you've got really good, you'll have great rental demand from even later on if you decide to hold the property, you could rent your property out to a medical practitioner because you're going to have all of these people move into this area. So this is a job-creating facility. You've got Melbourne's main shopping centre, which is 6-minute drive. You've got 2-minute drive to supermarket, medical centre, chemist, gym, childcare. And then the other bit is that Catholic school, St Lawrence's, which is down the road. So you're looking at a really gorgeous premium little area where we had a conversation with our land estate agent recently, and she said, look, most of the clients that are purchasing in that land estate are focused on their owner-occupiers. So when you put a client into an owner-occupier land estate, what you're doing is you're putting them in really good company, and it's been predominantly purchased by owner-occupiers. So these people are going to take care of their roads, they're going to take care of their gardens. This land estate, we believe, will capitalise really well, and then it's got all that other, it's feathered and pillowed in really well with all that other great stuff, which is the schools and the shops and direct routes, and then you've got the infrastructure to roads. I mean, and then you lean that really nicely against that 98% forecast and population change. You're like, yeah, this is where we're going to put our clients. Because remember, what we want to do when they were selling up in the mines, and we never sold up in the mining areas, but when you're selling in the mines, you're basically putting your client into a chair with one leg. That was always going to fail. But when we look at the data and we look at the infrastructure and we look at the employment nodes and we look at the medical precincts and we look at the community that they're building there and these beautiful land estates, what we're doing is we're putting our client into an asset or a chair with 7 legs. You know, if say they decide that they're not going to do one of the main thoroughfares, one of the roads, well, that's okay because there are 7 other infrastructure projects being built there. We're protecting our client's asset moving forward. And that's the most wonderful thing about this area. Look, Melbourne South, 10, 15 years ago, if you and I were having a conversation about Melbourne, I'd be telling you to move on and that we weren't looking there. So it's had this really lovely slow growth and it's growing up, and it's an area now that's worthy of consideration, and there's still viability because the purchase price is still soft enough. You're still getting in there. You're getting in a great big fat chunk of land in a beautiful estate. We've got all this other good stuff happening around it.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're looking at really in this part of Melbourne is a current seeming oversupply, potential oversupply, but we're looking at that based on regular pan-Australian population growth of, I don't know what that figure is, but if we're now looking at it in terms of almost 100% doubling of population, then those NDIS figures are going to be way beyond double.
But the other thing to think about too, like, this is the other bit as well, like with the provider that we're working with, we know that they're provider-led. So the providers are saying, we need more product in this area. And they know they need more properties in the area because they've got a massive medical precinct being built. So you've got to be able to, while the data coming from our supply and demand data coming from government is nice, I don't think really conservatively they've taken into consideration the population.
Oh, of course not. I mean, this data is just the actual figures. That's all we're looking at.
Yeah, but you stick 200,000 more people in there, Debbie, and all of a sudden you've got a potluck dinner that everybody's going to want to come to.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's a long-term strategy there in the West, but it's definitely looking like an area where don't just look at the data, look at the real big picture in this area. And thanks so much for that insight, Elizabeth. That is, I think a lot of people.
I told you it was going to be sexy.
Yeah.
You looked at me like, I don't know, girl. I don't know. It looks like to be sexy, but that is, you know, here's the thing, right? what you want for your clients when they say it's capitalisation, you want to mitigate as much as of that risk as you possibly can. That's why it's always got to be Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
Just has to be,
Yeah.
Let's do beverage. Have you got high demand for beverage?
I do have the demand for beverage. And, okay, so the beverage area falls into the SA3 region of Whittlesea, Wallen. That also encompasses places such as Bundoora, Mill Park, Thomastown, Wallen, Whittlesea, Epping, South Morang, North Morang, Wallet, Doreen, Lalor, and Mernda. So this is up in the north, and it actually falls into the SA4 region of northeast Melbourne, which I do know from other data I've put together is one of the highest demand, lowest development areas for SDA in Melbourne. But looking at the actual SA3 supply and demand, we've currently got 5,620 NDIS participants in the area. So 6% of that number would be 337 potential SDA-funded participants. Currently, there are 286. So we're already seeing quite a high percentage of the NDIS participants having SDA funding. Now, for those 286 participants, we have 246 places in existing supply. So again, fairly well supplied, not a huge gap at current numbers. What does the pipeline look like? Only 143 places, 86 dwellings with 143 places in the pipeline. Now, that's what we're seeing. Long term, we could be looking at potentially about another maybe 300 participants in the next 10 years based on current average Australia-wide growth. So, Elizabeth, that leads us into what's going on in Beveridge and North Melbourne.
Glad you asked. So here's the thing, right? It comes back to that. So the first thing we analyze is, are we going to get people in there? Just once again, that's what we need. If you're not looking at the population growth of an area, you shouldn't be investing in real estate.
Yeah. And I tell you what, I look at at Beveridge on the map.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even show on the NDIS stats. It doesn't even exist as a suburb. It's just like this big green area with nothing there. So it's obviously...
It is one of those.
Yeah.
We've taken research, and I've taken clients out to areas where there are cows in the fields. And I've stood there and I said to them, please ignore the cows. Because it's not till you start looking at the data that you start to appreciate what's actually going to happen in the area, right? So Beveridge is one of those areas. Now, Beveridge is in a little area called Mitchellshire. So that's a suburb, right? Mitchellshire. So this is what we've got. We've got a population change from 51,000 to 176,000 people by 2041. So the percentage is 208%.
Wow.
And everybody says to me, but Beveridge is in the middle of nowhere. Where are these people? How far away is it from Melbourne? Like, they're so centralised that Melbourne, they've got this idea that Melbourne is the employment of people in the north. It's actually not. It's not the employer. You know, you've got Mickleham, you're in the north, you've got your own infrastructure up there that's going to support providing employment for everybody that's moving into this particular area. You're really close to the airport up there too. So you've actually got a base that isn't directly connected to the Melbourne CBD. And this is what's happening. We're building these micro cities away from Melbourne. And Mitchellshire is one of those micro cities. Now, I was doing some data with a client the other day on Beveridge. So right now, they've done, there are 1,058 new approvals for new dwellings. That's a 2022 data. We've got 1,199 new completed dwellings. So based on a 3-child family, which is kind of I should have probably done it for 2 children and a mum and dad, but I did 3. We would need every year 3,222 new dwellings every year. So right now they're just shy of 1,000 dwellings. So what happens when you're not building enough in a particular area is it puts huge demand on the rental properties because these people are coming into the area. Where are they going to live? So all of a sudden, as an investor, you're in a market where you can determine your baseline rent. You kind of see how that works? Because there's nowhere for people to live and they're not building fast enough. Now, when you're not building fast enough, If people rush into a market, what happens is the price of the land increases exponentially and the price to build increases exponentially. That's capitalisation. That's the purest form of capitalisation. Now, when we look at SDA, when you look at a population change of 208%, you've got families moving in there with disabled children, and you've got people that can't afford to live close to Melbourne CBD moving into Beveridge to populate. And of course, I don't know anyone that doesn't have or know someone that has a family member that's disabled that needs care. So this is really nice for Beveridge. So we've done the population. So Beveridge itself as an area, in the next 5 years, around 9,000 people are expected to move into Beveridge, just in the next 5 years. We've got manufacturing in Mitchell, including food production. We've got defence. We've got, I can't even say this name, but there's an Australian Defence Force where there are 300 families out there. We've got agricultural. We've got the Shire has served by 2 hospitals, Kilmore and the District Hospital, which is really critical. We need that really good medical care for our SDA participants. We've got primary schools, Beveridge, Broadfield, Kilmore, Seymour, Womyn. But what I want to get to is infrastructure. Let me go there. Okay, so we've got a couple of transport. We've got the Watson Street. We've got 80 million on Watson Street. We've got the Wallan-Kilmore bypass at 300 million. We've got the Cameron Lane interchange at 300 million. We've got the electric fleet bus. So those are some of the major infrastructure projects. We've got the energy FERA. So they're going to produce anywhere between 200 to 250 jobs. We've got long-term, the Mitchell Shire aims to establish the Beveridge intermodal freight transport hub, which is really important. That's going to give us 20,000 jobs. Across the Shire, there are small projects unfurling. We've got the Kilmore is being revitalised at 3.4 million. We've got a makeover of 42 million to be spent on a tank at the Artillery Museum. We've got all this money being pumped into this particular area, which we know centralises people. It's all about just building an infrastructure, giving people jobs, families going out there. And when you've got a population change of 208%, there's no other reason to look anywhere else. But here's the thing, you've got to get your head around it. It's a long way from Melbourne, but they're not being employed in Melbourne, okay?
So, wow, you've just blown me away, Elizabeth, with those numbers. Yeah, I as I said, I look at the map and I think, okay, there's demand there, but there's nothing actually there. I know you've been talking for ages about the potential in these areas, and the way you've put it is unbelievable. So I think that anybody is looking at the Melbourne market, and we have been talking about how amazing the Melbourne market is for a while now. It's one of our favourite areas. We work with a really good builder down there who are doing some amazing provider-led packages, really high quality, really great potential for full tenancy. And yes, they only build in the new estates in greenfield areas. This is obviously why, because they know what's going on. The providers know what's going on in terms of the population, where it's moving to. And that just backs up. So people, it's not always about looking at the supply and demand as of now. And by the way, these stats that I've just been talking about came out, I think they were published on Wednesday or Thursday last week, the latest quarterly data from the NDIA based on the figures at the end of June 2023. So this is the latest data, but the pipeline, sure enough, it gives you what might be built and probably will be built in the future. But it doesn't tell you that on-the-ground intel of what's really going on in an area. And that is so important to look at that as well. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your insight into this.
You're welcome. I get excited about it. I'm sorry. But here's the thing too, Debbie, right? We know that the builder's going to build in 6 months.
Yes.
So that's a tick. They're building in areas where they've already considered that they're provider-led. That's a tick. But now what we can say with assurance is that the population and the data supports it for long-term capitalisation.
Uh-huh.
And that's sexy. And, your buy rate into Beveridge is about 820. Your buy rate into Weir's Views looking at about 930 to start for SDA. But what you want to take heed with is that you're buying in an area. You'll be taking some yield at the front, but at the end, you're going to have this really beautiful feathered capitalisation just sitting there waiting for you and your family, which is beautiful.
And forgive me if I've got this wrong, but if we're specifically talking about Weir Views, would this not to some degree also affect all those surrounding areas in West Melbourne? And likewise, Beveridge, all those surrounding areas in the Whittle Seawallen area?
What we do is I buy all my research from Terry Ryder. Terry only ever does 4 key growth areas in Melbourne. These 2 areas, Weir's View and Beveridge, are his 2 key growth areas. So when Terry Ryder says buy in this area, what he's done is he's looked at 7 key indicators to ensure growth. So if Terry says this is the area, we buy in the area. And you're right. If you've got an area, if you've got Weir's View and right next to it is, I don't even know out there, Melbourne South, you're absolutely right, because it all ricochets. Population moves into the area. It's almost like dropping a pebble into some water. But what I tend to do is I stick really close to that trajectory. If he says Beveridge, I put my clients into Beveridge. If he says Weir Views, I'm in Weir's View. But you look at where the hospitals are too. Like it's got to be a really compelling story. And like the land estate that we're working in down here in Melbourne for Weir's Views, it's something like 70 to 80% are owner occupier. That's a great land estate. It's got the schools 2 minutes down the road. It's got the train station is 6 minutes down the road. You've got all this other stuff built around this land estate. So you've got to be really selective in ensuring that you feather the clients into that as well. But the stories themselves, the data's certainly there.
Yeah, it totally. So anything else to add?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me to go, because I really enjoy this stuff.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, I love the data and hearing that side of it that backs it up or backs up what we're seeing our providers and our builders doing, because they also know what's going on there. We're from Brisbane. We don't know what's going on in Melbourne, and that's why it's so important that we've got people like you on the ground and we've got the providers who are working, and we're tapping into all those different sources of information, because as we tell all of our investors, you've got to find your data from so many different places. Don't just ask us, do your own research. And so for anyone listening who has been talking to us or hearing about us talking about the Melbourne market and how much we really like it, this is just, really solid information for you to go away and do your own research. But if you want to talk to us more about what we've got going on here, we'd love to give you a better understanding of the different properties and the packages and the builder details and just how it all works. So I think that's been a really great episode. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure doing
it. And look forward to covering another Melbourne area, a different one maybe.
Yeah, do you know what? There's a couple I'm thinking about. Regional Victoria is often overlooked, but boy, there's some great stuff going on there too.
Great.
I'm happy to check in with you in the next, month or two to go through that.
For sure. Let's do it. All right. Thank you, and see you next time, everyone.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.